The Immigration Department is one of the territory's border control and protection agencies responsible for monitoring the entry and exit of persons traveling into and out of the Virgin Islands. On part 1 of our program series, Acting Chief Immigration Officer Mr. Ian Penn discussed immigration matters as the department heads towards a reformed direction for a new immigration experience. On part 2 of our program, Acting Chief Immigration Officer Mr. Ian Penn returns to share on our immigration matters as it relates to working and residing in the BVI. I am your host, GIS Information Officer Nadia James Harris, and when we return, it's another enlightening program on immigration matters. So stay tuned.
Did you know the berthing agreement signed by the government of the Virgin Islands with Disney and Norwegian Cruise Lines will bring a minimum of 425,000 passengers annually beginning in 2015? That's 425,000 reasons for quality customer service. We are one BVI, and let's work together to ensure that every visitor has a unique BVI experience.
Today's Peer Point has been brought to you by the government of the Virgin Islands.
Mr. Penn, welcome back to part 2 in our program series.
Glad to be back.
As one of the territory's border protection agencies, the Immigration Department controls access to with entry and exit in and out of the territory. Please give us a summary of the Immigration and Passport Ordinance, which is the primary legislation that governs this process.
Yes. The Immigration and Passport Ordinance Cap 130 of 1977. There are a number of sections that deals with entry and exit of persons into the territory. And I will start by Section 20, which deals on restriction of landing into the territory. And what that basically says is that no person shall land in the territory without the leave of an immigration officer. Now, what that means is that nobody can enter the territory for any purpose without an immigration officer being present and without that immigration officer giving you leave to enter the territory. Okay? Section 21. Section 21 deals with persons who are entitled to land in the territory. And those persons are persons who are belongers, persons who are residents in the territory, persons of diplomatic status, persons who are employed with the government of the territory, and so on. And we also have Section 23, which deals with grant of leave to land in the territory. And what that section talks about is it talks about granting leave to persons who are qualified, meaning that if a visitor comes to the territory, that visitor must qualify, meaning that he should have a return ticket, meaning that he should have prearranged accommodation into the territory, meaning that he should be able to financially support himself in the territory. Once those are met, then leave will be granted.
And Mr. Penn, this qualified to land in the territory aspect, this is something that is not special to the BVI. I mean, other countries do this as well.
Yes, of course.
Speaking of the entitled list, because you've called a number of categories in there. We have the belongers, we have persons who are visiting once they show that they can support themselves, and we also have the persons who are on work permits or working with government. Another part of this would be the list of countries who do not need visas to enter into the BVI, citizens from these countries. Can you give us an idea of some of these countries?
Yes, some of the countries that, you mean that require visas? Or
that require visas, or they do not require visas to come into the BVI?
Right. Some of the countries who do not require visas Canada, the USA, most of the countries or all of the countries in Europe, and most of the Caribbean countries. A number of countries require visas to come to the territory. A number of them are South American countries that require visas to come here. The persons from China, persons from Asia, countries from Asia. Most countries from Asia would require a visa to come to the territory. There's some countries in the Caribbean that requires visas, like Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, and Guyana. And there's a number of countries worldwide.
So to summarize the list of some of the countries on this list would include those that do not need visas, Canadian citizens, citizens from the United States, we have most Caribbean islands, and Europe, any country from the European Union.
Yes, most countries.
And
yes.
those who do require visas would be countries, citizens whose countries are Haiti, Dominican Republic, and some of the Caribbean islands as well.
Yes.
What specific immigration policies affect employers hiring expat workers and expat employees as it relates to residing and working in the territory?
Yes. Some specific policy, I won't really say policies per se, but under the immigration ordinance, where employers wish to hire someone to come into the territory, what happens is that when the process is started at the Labor Department for the initial application of the work permit process, once that is approved at the Labor Department issues a labor clearance, meaning that that there is a job for that person to come into the territory. And that clearance has to come to immigration to be cleared, to be approved for that person to actually come into the territory. Okay, so there's a difference right there. The labor has done their part, meaning that they're telling the employer that your application has been approved for a job. That's it. For an employee, for a job, that's it. But now, for that person to actually enter the territory, they have to go through immigration control. And part of the immigration control is that we have to do our due diligence, meaning that we have to do some background checks on that person. So if we do our background checks and we find that that person has a criminal background, that can hinder that person from entering the territory, because if the person has a criminal background, it means that that person would be inadmissible to enter the territory.
Mr. Penn, in doing the due diligence, does this mean that the Immigration Department partners with other international border protection agencies to get the relevant background checks and information that would be needed?
Yes, we do.
So there's a computerized network, there are relationships that are used to make sure that the people and residents of the territory are protected from any undesirable.
Yes.
What are some of the types of challenges that are faced by the department in terms of carrying out its duties?
Some of the challenges that we face in carrying out their duties is that sometimes persons can come to the department for services, and sometimes people can get irritated. People can try to talk down to the officers, but the officers are there to provide a service, and the only how both parties can get through whatever the service is to provide is that everybody does so calmly, professionally, so that whatever there is to be done, can be done in a manner that you're not actually fighting against each other.
Because the immigration officers are there to assist, they're there to provide services.
Definitely.
And to do so in a courteous way, and at the same time, the public, their clients, have to understand that in order for this to be accomplished, there's a cooperation or a collaborative effort that needs to take place.
Right, right. So therefore, there has to be cooperation on both sides, and therefore, we cannot have customers, being rude to the officers, or belittling the officers, or want to say things that can upset persons, and expect to get proper service. So it would be better, if persons who are coming to get the service come in and do so. I know there are long lines, especially at the processing unit. However, if persons cooperate, I'm sure that they would, get out of the processing unit in good time. If persons cooperate and do what they have to do, and listen to the instructions of the immigration officers.
In regards to cooperation and listening to the instructions of the immigration officers, what are some of the documents? Can you give our listeners an idea of some of the documents that might be needed to help facilitate your process and reduce your waiting time? So you're also reducing the frustration on the end of the clients coming in to get the services from the department.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I would say that sometimes customers could be frustrated of long waiting time. Sometimes customers would have to come and go back and come again, and that can be frustrating. However, as I said before, if customers adhere to the instructions of the immigration officers, and if they don't understand, it is okay for them to ask the officer, could you repeat what you have said to me, and so that they could get it done right, and get out of the service, and and on their way. To your second part, persons who come to do a new application, or persons who come to the country for the first time, the forms that they would need from immigration to be filled and would be the application for an entry permit, which they have to provide details of themselves, and also a bond form which has to be taken to the employer to be filled out and returned. So those applications and the bond form, what we are hoping for in our reform going forward is to make those forms available on our website, and to so that people can have access to them, so that persons can have access to them, and have them pre-filled out before coming in, and that would cut down on their time tremendously, waiting to get dealt with in that regard.
Mr. Penn, labor and immigration often work closely together to get persons processed, whether it's for time in the BVI or for work permits. What types of applications would utilize the services of both departments?
Yes, the application that links the Labor Department and Immigration is the labor clearance that I alluded to a while back. Now, initially what happens is the employer would apply to Labor Department for a work permit for someone, and once it's approved, Labor would issue the a labor clearance stating that it has been approved and there's work for this person to fulfill their employer needs. Now, once that is done, the labor clearance comes to Immigration Department for vetting purposes. And what happens is, our service charter state that once the labor clearance enter the department, it can be checked within 5 working days. However, we do not wait until the 5th day to say we're going to check the labor clearance. As they come in, we do a diligence. And sometimes, we can have them ready before the 5th day. Once that is done, once the labor clearance is vetted and checked by immigration and it's approved, the employer or an agent of the employer would come to the department and pick up that labor clearance. And most of the times, a medical form would be attached, and a number of boxes on the labor clearance is checked. And what that means is that before the person come into the territory, they have a number of documents or things that they have to do before they come into the territory. And that is what checks, and that is what is marked off on the labor clearance. Things like, they should have a police record, the medical should be completed outside the territory. And if, say for instance, if an employee coming from one of the countries that require a visa, they would have to acquire that visa before coming to the territory. So all those things must be acquired before coming to the territory.
Is it a process then where prior to going to labor, persons need to stop in at the immigration department to make sure that their entry permits, their entry requirements are up to date, then they go to the labor department?
Well, in cases where persons are already in a territory working and their permits are for a year, and once the permit is ended, what happens is that they have to renew their work permit at the labor department. So what happens is that before that they can go to the labor department, as long as the year permit has run out, labor department would not issue a renewal unless that person has current immigration status in the territory. So which means that the person would have to come to immigration, get an extension, and once they get an extension, then they can go to labor department and renew their work permit.
Mr. Penn, on our first program, we spoke about the number of units that are comprised of the immigration department. We spoke about the accounting unit, the administrative unit. We spoke about the processing unit, which most persons are familiar with. We spoke about the surveillance unit, and
Right.
we also made reference to the status unit.
Right.
Now, tell us about the status unit and the surveillance unit in terms of just making sure, particularly the status unit, because we know that persons tend to bring their residency and belonger applications to that unit. Is it housed in the immigration department? Tell us more about that unit.
Okay, the status unit actually is housed in the Premier's office. We do have an officer from the status unit that sits in the immigration department, and that officer receives application for both residence and belonger status, and they acknowledge those applications. Now, once those applications are acknowledged, those applications are then sent down to the Premier's office for further processing. The surveillance unit, on the other hand, the surveillance unit we have a surveillance unit in Virgin Gorda, and we have one in Tortola. And another prime function of the surveillance unit is that they process deportation orders for persons who have been convicted of any crime in the territory, whether against the immigration ordinance or against the criminal code of the territory. So once those persons are prosecuted and are found guilty, and the crime is punishable of 3 months or more, what happens is that the chief immigration officer can recommend for a deportation order for that person, because it would mean now that that person has come into this country probably to work or to reside, and if you're going to come into another man's country, you're expected to be a law-abiding citizen.
Exactly.
Right. So if you broke the law, it means that that the privilege that you've enjoyed staying into this country would no longer exist, and therefore a deportation order can be recommended for your removal.
Thank you, Mr. Pan. Thank you for sharing and clarifying the work of the Immigration Department, because immigration does matter. And as we prepare to wrap up our program series, are there any last words that you would like to leave with our listeners as it relates to the work of the Immigration Department?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Harris. Yes, I would like to say to the listening public that in the near future, that a lot of changes will come to the Immigration Department. First and foremost, we will be focusing on our customer relation. We want to make sure that immigration is a department that person can approach without fear. We don't want persons to think of Immigration Department as a place that is, unapproachable. We want to think of Immigration Department as a place of doing business. And therefore, I would like to appeal to, the listening public, that those who have business with the Immigration Department to come and do so, and to respect the officers, because once respect is given, respect is on, and it's given back the same way, okay? And the service that would be generated or given to our customers out there would be one that would be everyone that would be proud of. And I'm sure the word would spread that immigration is the top department in the BVI, as I mentioned in my first segment, and that persons will look forward to coming and doing business with the Immigration Department. If for any reason you come to the Immigration Department and the service that you're trying to achieve, you find any difficulties, I'm very approachable. You can make an appointment to come and see me, and we'll see how we can get it worked out. I am a person that feels that any problem should have a solution, and we can come together and find a solution to most problems that we have. Sometimes the solution may not be in the best interest of everyone, or sometimes the solution may not be the solution that anyone is hoping for. But however, there's always a solution.
Thank you, Mr. Penn.
Thank you.
On this program series, we've been speaking with Acting Chief Immigration Officer Mr. Ian Penn on immigration matters as the department introduces its immigration reform and what this means for an improved travel experience into and out of the territory, as well as work and residency requirements for the Virgin Islands. For more information, contact the Immigration Department at 284-468-4700 or email immigration@gov.vg. For the Department of Information and Public Relations and the Premier's Office, I've been your host, GIS Information Officer Nadia James Harris, and it's been a pleasure having you with us. To keep up with the latest events and get your official government news, visit the government website at bvi.gov.vg or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter at BVI Government.